I'm Dr. Christy, and this is Climbing Fish Parenting, practical parenting strategies in 20 minutes or less. I'm a psychologist and behavior analyst, and I work with exhausted, overwhelmed parents who feel like they've tried everything and nothing works. If you're listening to this while folding the laundry, hiding in your car, or wishing bedtime would just end already, you're in the right place. Today, I want to introduce you to one idea that's been underneath every single strategy I've ever given you on this show. Something I call reading the tide. Once you learn to see it, half the parenting advice you've ever gotten either starts working or finally makes sense why it didn't. Ready to transform your parenting journey? Let's dive in. Two moms in the same friend group both had kids struggling with the same thing, getting out the door in the morning without a fight. Both moms went to the same parenting workshop. Both left with the exact same tool. A visual sticker chart, 5 steps, 1 sticker per step, small reward at the end of the week. One family used it for 3 weeks, and mornings got genuinely easier. The other family used it for 4 days, and it fell apart completely. There were meltdowns over the chart itself. The kid refused to even look at the chart, and there was more conflict than before they started. Both moms did the exact same thing. Same chart, same steps, same reward structure, same amount of follow-through. One mom said, almost apologetically, "I must be doing it wrong." She wasn't doing it wrong. She was using a tool built for a different problem than the one her kid actually had. Here's what I think's actually going on, and it's bigger than one sticker chart. Almost all parenting advice, books, articles, well-meaning workshops gets sold to you as a strategy. Do this thing, and this result follows. It's clean. It's tidy. It fits in a headline. But a strategy is just the visible part. It's what you can see above the surface. What actually determines whether that strategy works or fails is happening underneath, in things you can't see just by watching the 5 minutes where the meltdown happens. Sensory load that built up over the whole day. Executive functioning demand that's already maxed out from school. Emotional reserve that got spent somewhere else before your child even walked in the door. I call this reading the tide. The behavior you see is what's visible above the waterline. The tide, the actual level of demand, capacity, and load that your child is carrying at that exact moment, is what's underneath. And it's rising and falling constantly, often for reasons that have nothing to do with whatever's directly in front of them. When a strategy works, it's usually not because the strategy itself is magic. It's because it happened to land on a kid whose tide was low enough at that moment for a new demand to actually fit. When the same strategy fails on a different kid, or fails on the same kid on a different day, it's very rarely because the parent just did it wrong. It's because the tide was already high and the new demand didn't fit. Here's why this matters so much. When a strategy fails, the tide is invisible, but the failure isn't. What's visible is your kid melting down over the chart, or refusing the plan, or doing the exact opposite of what the sticker chart was supposed to produce. So the natural conclusion, the one almost every parent reaches, because it's the only piece of information sitting right in front of them, is something's wrong with my kid, or something's wrong with me. Neither is true. What's actually true is much less dramatic and much more useful. The strategy and the tide didn't match, and nobody was looking at the tide. This is, I think, the single most common thing I see burning parents out. Not lack of effort, not lack of good information. It's cycling through strategy after strategy, all of them reasonable, some of them genuinely well-designed, without ever stopping to ask what's actually happening beneath the behavior you're trying to fix. Here's a second story, because I don't want you to hear sleep and sensory noise and assume the tide is always about the same 1 or 2 things. It isn't. It's different for every kid, and sometimes it's not even about that day at all. A dad I worked with had a son who handled Legos, homework, chores, pretty much every task in the house, completely differently, depending on the week. Some weeks he'd sit down and get through his reading log without a single complaint. Other weeks, the exact same 10 minutes of reading turned into a 45-minute standoff, and nothing about the evening looked any different on the surface. Same dinner time, Same bedtime, same amount of sleep the night before. It took months before the dad noticed the actual pattern. And it wasn't sleep at all. It was his son's older sister. On weeks she had a heavy travel soccer schedule and was gone most evenings, his son was calm and easy. On weeks she was home more, doing homework at the same table. Something about sharing that space, the noise of her existing nearby, the comparison, the competition for attention, was quietly taking up capacity that had nothing to do with reading at all. He told me I would never have gone looking there. It didn't look related. That's exactly the point. The tide isn't always the obvious thing. Sometimes it's not even in the room where the behavior happens. One more thing about that invisibility, because it's part of why the tide is so easy to miss. What fills the tide isn't the same from kid to kid. For a lot of ADHD kids, the tide fills with effort that you can't see. The sheer cost of holding attention on things that don't grab them, managing impulses all day, sitting still when their body's asking to move. A day that looks easy on paper can be enormously expensive to run, and none of that expense shows until it's spent. For a lot of kids with autism, the tide fills with sensory input and unpredictability. The lights, the sounds, the schedule change nobody warned them about, the substitute teacher. It's often cumulative in a way that hides itself. The tide holds, and then it doesn't. For anxious kids, the tide fills with vigilance, the constant background scanning for what might go wrong, the what-ifs running under every transition. That's capacity being spent on a threat that never has to actually arrive to cause something. Same sticker chart, same morning. 3 completely different reasons the tide might already be too high for it. And here's why that matters for you specifically. It means that you can't borrow another family's tide map. The thing that drains your friend's kid might cost yours nothing, and the thing that cost yours the most might be invisible to everyone else. Like a sister doing homework at the same table. Your kid's tide has its own sources, which is exactly why watching your own kid beats following anyone else's rules about what should be hard. I want to be really clear about something, because I don't want this episode to land as just accept less from your kid. That's not what reading the tide means. It means the same expectation can be reasonable on a low tide day and completely unreasonable on a high tide day for the exact same kid doing the exact same task. Reading the tide isn't about giving up on getting your child through their reading log or out the door on time or through any of it. It's about recognizing that the way you get there on a low tide Tuesday might need to look completely different from how you get there on a high tide Friday. And that difference isn't inconsistency. It's actually responding to what's true instead of applying the same fix regardless of what's underneath it. This is also, honestly, the thing that lets you stop taking it personally. A strategy that worked beautifully last month and suddenly doesn't, isn't proof you lost your touch. It's proof the tide moved. Those are very different problems, and only one of them is about you. There's a side effect of this I didn't expect the first time I started teaching it, and it has nothing to do with your kid at all. It changes how you and a co-parent, or a grandparent, or a teacher talk about what's going on. "He's just not listening to me anymore" is a sentence about character. It invites blame, and it usually gets answered with either defensiveness or a matching diagnosis about what's wrong with the kid. "Something's different this week, and I haven't figured it out yet" is a completely different sentence. It's an observation, not an accusation, and it invites the other person to help you look instead of picking a side. I've watched this small shift in language diffuse arguments between co-parents who were otherwise circling the same exhausting loop. One convinced the kid was manipulating, the other convinced the first parent was too harsh. Neither was right because both were arguing about the visible behavior instead of the tide underneath it. Once the conversation moves to, "What's the tide doing?" there's suddenly something to investigate together instead of a character to defend or attack. Before I give you this week's challenge, I want to be honest with you about where this road eventually leads. Because reading the tide as powerful as it is, runs into a wall. You can't lower every tide. You can adjust the morning routine, but you can't control the classroom. You can protect the after-school hour, but you can't schedule the substitute teacher, or quiet the birthday party, or make the cousin's house predictable. Your kid is going to spend more and more of their life in water you didn't get to check first. That's not a failure of tide reading. That's just what growing up is. And here's the thing I've noticed about most kids who are wired differently. They are the last person to know their own tide is rising. They don't feel it coming. They feel fine and fine and fine. And then they're underwater and everyone around them is asking what happened, and they genuinely don't know. The person the tide is happening to has the least warning of anyone in the room. So eventually, every parent who learns to read the tide arrives at the same question. It's not, how do I keep the tide low? You already know you can't. Not everywhere. It's this. How does my kid learn to notice their own tide before it carries them away? Because reading your child's tide and your child learning to read their own, those are two different jobs. The first one is yours, and it's the one this episode is about. The second one is theirs, and it's a skill, which means it can be taught. That's a conversation for another day. But I want you to hold that question, because once you're reading the tide well, it's the question that comes next, and it changes what you're building toward. Not a childhood with lower tides, a kid who can feel the water rising. Next time a strategy that used to work suddenly doesn't, resist the urge to ask, what's wrong with this strategy? Or what's wrong with my kid? Ask one question instead. Is this a today problem or an always problem? If you can point to something specific about today or this week, even something that seems unrelated, the way that soccer schedule was, that's tide information. And the move is to give it room, not fight it. If nothing about today explains it, and this has been true for weeks regardless of what's going on around it, that's a different kind of problem, and it's worth digging into further. You don't have to solve which one it is on the spot. Just ask the question before you reach for a fix. If you're listening to this thinking, okay, but I genuinely don't know how to tell which one I'm looking for, that's exactly why I built the quiz. It takes about 2 minutes, and it's designed to help you see the pattern underneath your child's specific behavior, instead of guessing your way through strategy after strategy. You can find it at climbingfishparenting.com/quiz. All right, that's it for today. Your kid isn't the problem, and neither is the last strategy that didn't work. The tide was high, and nobody was looking at it. Once you start reading it, everything else, every strategy you've already got, every one I've ever given you, gets a lot easier to use well. If this episode changed how you're thinking about something that's been frustrating you, hit the share button and send it to someone else who's been blaming themselves for a strategy that just didn't fit the day. That strategy I just gave you, it's the whole climbing fish philosophy in action. There's a quote, everybody's a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. Your kid isn't broken. Your parenting isn't broken. Sometimes we're just asking our fish to climb trees. That's what we fix here. I'm Dr. Christy, and I'll see you next week.